Let's go over just a few things for everybody. We are so happy to see we have well over 100 people that have joined at this point. And let's talk about just a couple of things to go over with everybody, and then we'll start asking the candidates some questions. So welcome everybody, and especially welcome to our three candidates, Bridget Fleming, Perry Gershon, and Nancy Goroff. We're so happy to have you here. And these three candidates are running for the Democratic nomination, as you know, for the New York's Congressional District 1, the seat now being held by Lee Zeldin. They're running for the Democratic nomination. We'll go over just a little bit about the forum's format. Members of the two peace groups will be asking the candidates a number of questions. And as you know, an email was sent to all attendees, which included an invitation to submit suggested questions in advance by email. We received an awful lot. We were really happy about that. The questions that are asked today will be a combination of questions. Some of them were written by members of the two peace groups. And there will be a number of questions that were submitted by some of the attendees. Each candidate will be asked each of the questions. We will rotate the order in which the candidates are asked so that no one candidate will always be first, second, or third. The candidates will be asked to keep their answers to about a minute or so, and I will politely interrupt if a response goes on for too long. At different points, the candidates will be offered the opportunity to offer additional brief comments if they would like to. And then after the question and answer session, the three candidates will be asked to make brief closing statements. The North Country Peace Group and the South Country Peace Group, thank you for joining us. And Susan Peretti will begin by going over the bios that were submitted by the candidates.
Okay, hi, I'm Susan Peretti, co-host of tonight's event and a member of North Country Peace Group. First, a few words about tonight's sponsors. The North Country Peace Group has been demonstrating for peace and justice on the corner of Route 25A and Bennett's Road in Setauket every Saturday since December 2002. It rejects the culture of perpetual war and works to end the interlocking injustices of militarism, racism, and economic exploitation. North Country Peace Group invites you to join its Saturday vigil, 11 a.m. to 12:15 p.m., and to visit its Facebook page. South Country Peace Group was formed in 1982 in response to escalating threats of global nuclear destruction. Through annual public events, core activities, and collaboration with other peace and justice groups, South Country Peace Group advocates to stop the arms trade, cut the arms budget, and redirect resources to the environment and human needs. For more information, you can contact them at southcountrypeacegroup@yahoo.com. Now, before we begin, I'll read short bios that were provided to us by the candidates. The information is not intended to be an endorsement of any particular candidate, and here they are in alphabetical order. First candidate, Bridget Fleming. Bridget was elected to the Southampton Town Board in a special election in March 2010. She won re-election in 2011 for a 4-year term. In 2015, Bridget was elected to the Suffolk County Legislature for the 2nd Legislative District. Since then, Bridget has secured over $10 million in clean water and infrastructure funding for her district. A leading voice against cuts to public bus service, she successfully advocated for an additional $2 million in state transportation support and established the Public Transportation Working Group in response to the elimination of 8 bus routes. Bridget worked for almost a decade as an assistant district attorney in the office of legendary district attorney Robert Morgenthau in Manhattan, where she was a member of the Trial Bureau and the Sex Crimes Prosecution Unit, and later as the chief of a unit devoted to attacking fraud in public programs. A resident of Southampton since 2001, Bridget lives in Noyak with her husband Bob and their son Jai. Second candidate, Perry Gershon. Perry Gershon is the progressive Democrat who will beat Lee Zeldin and hold Donald Trump accountable. Perry is fed up with Republicans like Zeldin and Trump who are trying to take away health care from millions of Americans, squeezing the middle class to fund budget-busting tax giveaways for the ultra-wealthy and big corporations and who have handled the coronavirus pandemic so poorly. Perry has been endorsed by essential workers, labor unions, by the Long Island Environmental Voters Forum, but for Perry, the most important endorsement is from the voters of Congressional District 1. And finally, Nancy Goroff. For over 2 decades, Nancy Goroff has lived in Brookhaven, where she raised her 2 daughters and taught at Stony Brook University. Nancy served as Associate Provost, Interim Dean of the Graduate School, and most recently, Chair of the Chemistry Department, where she managed 300 employees and a multi-million-dollar budget. If elected, Nancy will be the first female PhD scientist in Congress. Now more than ever, we need scientists in Washington who have the professional scientific training needed to solve complex problems. Nancy is uniquely qualified to analyze the facts and make the right choices for Long Island families on climate change, fixing our healthcare system, and recovering from the coronavirus epidemic. She has been endorsed by Emily's List, the country's largest supporter of pro-choice women running for office, and by 314 Action, a group dedicated to getting scientists elected, and the National Organization of Women. And I'd like to introduce Myrna Gordon from North Country Peace Group, who will begin asking the questions for the evening.
Welcome everyone, and welcome candidates. Your first question is going to have to do with environmental concerns. And this question overlaps with a question submitted by Deborah from the audience, and here is your question. How do you see your future as a congressperson in advancing the objectives of the Green New Deal? Are there specific components of the Green New Deal that you would support or oppose? Please address your legislative priorities regarding greenhouse gases, alternative energy development, and carbon-free electric transportation initiatives. And the order that which the question will be answered is as follows. First, Bridget Fleming, then Perry Gershon, then Nancy Goroff. First is Bridget Fleming.
Thank you. It's such an excellent question, and I'm pleased to have been an advocate and a champion for the defense and the protection of our natural environment for the 10 years that I've been in local office. And so I recognize that climate change is an existential threat to our country and certainly to our region. We have over 1,000 miles of coastline here on Long Island. And so I, even in my county legislature role, have acted aggressively both to mitigate the impacts of climate change by establishing a capital program to invest in proactive infrastructure investments to protect our coastline, but also have been working very hard to increase our supply of clean energy as we move toward a more clean energy future, especially under New York's REV initiative. I'm really pleased to report that on the 20th of May, we are expecting the LIPA Board of Trustees to vote in favor of a community choice aggregation model for green energy supply. It's a great example of how I, as a legislator, marshaled a task force to advocate for this so that communities throughout Long Island will be able to tap into their own choice of clean energy supply. It's the kind of thing that the federal government needs to step into more and more. It's a challenging environment on Long Island where we have to trade, where we are called upon from time to time to trade, for instance, green for green by clearing trees to establish sizable or scalable solar farms. We don't need to do that if we have the resources. Oh, I'm sorry. We don't need to do that if we have the resources that are available to the federal government to provide incentives and development supports in order to move forward with a clean energy future. It's a critical part of my agenda and something that I'm proud to have delivered on in the district in the past, and looking forward to do the same in Congress.
Thank you. We have Perry Gershon.
Thank you, Myrna, and thank you everyone who's joined us. I see on the count there are 161 participants right now, and it's so great to be able to have all the candidates together, really for the first time since we were set inside for the COVID crisis. So with that, to the question, we absolutely need to address a clean energy economy in this country. If we go on at the rate that we're going, there will be no Long Island, no United States, and not a world that we can sustainably live in. The current administration has taken steps in the wrong direction, pulling out of the Paris Accord, and really rolling back all of our advancements, letting the incentives for solar energy expire, pushing coal and fossil fuels over clean energy. And we've got to go back the other way. We need to get off of fossil fuels and have our federal policy directed that way. The Green New Deal goes a long way towards getting this done. And it's certainly policy that's in the right direction. We absolutely must push an economy that works on clean energy, and we can do it in such a way that we actually build the Long Island economy up. And we can actually get new jobs in New York, one, as a result of clean energy policy. And that's what I'd like to implement as your congressman, to really push the federal government away from the fossil fuels, have a plan in place that's long-term, and promote research and development as well as the rollout of forms of clean energy. And
Please do finish up, excuse me.
Do it here so we can create $40 an hour jobs as opposed to $15 an hour jobs. And as we're trying to rejuvenate this economy post-COVID, what better place to invest than in clean energy infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Goroff?
Sorry. Thank you, Myrna. And I want to thank the North Country Peace Group and the South Country Peace Group for putting this event together. And I want to thank all of you for being on this call and for caring while you're going through so many other things, caring enough about this election and about beating Lee Zeldin to be here for tonight. So thank you, everyone. This issue is my top priority. As a scientist, I got into this election because I knew we need a government that's actually trying to focus on solving the important problems with climate change as the top problem we need to address. I've been a scientist and a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists since graduate school, and when I'm in Congress, I will make sure we take ambitious, concerted, sustained action on climate change. We need to set ambitious priorities and ambitious goals to be carbon neutral by 2035. We need to invest to deploy the technologies that exist now in renewable energy, in clean vehicles, and even clean buildings, and build up our clean energy infrastructure here on Long Island so that we have good clean energy jobs. And we need to invest in research for the future so that we can develop the technologies that are scalable to countries that are much poorer than this one, so that we have clean energy not only here, but we have reduced carbon output from countries like Bangladesh and India that cannot afford to go as we can with current technologies. And when I'm in Congress, I will make sure that every member of Congress has access to the best information, that all their questions get answered, and I will hold their feet to the fire to make sure that we take action on this issue, because it's—
Please do finish up, excuse me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. We now have an audience question from Sue and Jerry, and here's the question on environmental concerns. The Trump administration and their Republican allies in the US Senate have been undoing virtually all of the Obama-era federal policies protecting the climate and the environment. So far, 20 critical environmental regulations have been reversed. Can you tell us what you would do in the House of Representatives to seek to reinstate the protections that we have lost? And the order in which this question will be answered is as follows. First, Perry Gershon, then Nancy Goroff, then Bridget Fleming. Perry, you're first.
Great. Well, and thank you for the question. In terms of what the Trump administration has done, and they have, as the question pointed out, done a lot to dismantle the clean energy statutes that Obama had rolled out. And this included auto emissions, coal standards, and what you're allowed to do in terms of what can pollute the environment, targets for the future, all of that. And the problem is that Obama rolled these out by executive order, and Trump was able to essentially just, as the new chief executive, make Obama's executive order no longer valid. We need a way to make these laws or executive order mandated policies sustainable through the law. So Congress actually must act to pass the policies that Obama implemented. If we get a good Democratic majority in the House and the Senate and a Democratic president, we must make environmental regulations, restoring the environmental regulations of the Obama administration, a top priority. And again, as I said in the last comment, we can do that in conjunction with promoting the economy. It's a myth that the Republicans propagate that we need to take down environmental standards to move the economy forward. Yes, we must move the economy, but we've got to do it in an environmentally friendly way. And I'm prepared to do that, to be your representative in Congress, to stand by that policy. And oh, by the way, I have the endorsement of the Long Island Environmental Voters Forum. So I have a lot of people in my camp who believe that I'm going to be able to get this done.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Nancy Goroff.
Thank you so much. As a scientist, I find it infuriating the way that the Trump administration has sidelined scientists and sidelined facts and evidence in every part of the administration, trying to remove the experts from the Department of Interior and from the EPA, putting people in charge of every agency who are either lobbyists themselves or beholden to the lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry. And in particular, they have tried cynical attempts such as the secret science rule, pretending that important scientific studies are invalid because patient information has to be held confidential and that information cannot be released to the public, and therefore trying to negate many of the most important environmental regulations. As a scientist, I will make sure that we are using the best information possible. This is why I got in this race. I'm so frustrated with how they have dealt with the environment, and we have so many important problems we need to address. We cannot let them take these actions, and we need to have Congress stepping up to protect our clean water, to protect our environment all through. And I will be making sure that we are always using the best science.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Bridget Fleming, please.
Yes, thank you for the question. So important, and it's critically important that we step into this question with real authority from Long Island. We're a coastal community. Our water issues are very real, whether it's groundwater contamination like the 1,4-dioxane and perfluorinated compounds, or whether it's the red tide because of nitrification, or whether it's the erosion of our coastline, loss of critical wetlands, loss of critical wildlife habitat. Those are real issues that we need the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA engaged in right here on Long Island. We need to refund the EPA. Lee Zeldin voted to strip $50 million from the EPA, reducing staffing drastically. And we know that environmental protections have been explicitly rolled back, but even those that are in place, it's very difficult for these agencies to support them. First of all, because they're led by an administrator who is himself an oil industry lobbyist, Andrew Wheeler, but also because they simply don't have the people power to get the job done. We instead are seeing an administration which is turning the game over to polluters. So for instance, during COVID, a most cynical move by the Trump administration to say, okay, oil industry, you tell us if you are releasing too much methane gas into the atmosphere. Methane gas, which is a critically dangerous and very hot gas that's moving into the atmosphere and contributing to climate change. There's so many issues that we have to move forward on. We need champions who know the issues here on Long Island and can therefore bring those issues to help educate and to help give strength to the importance of protecting and defending our natural environment in national policy.
Thank you. And before we move to the next topic, I'd like to ask each of the candidates if you have any final or other comments on this topic before we move to the next subject. And can you please limit your response to 30 seconds? Any of the candidates?
Yes. I would like to just clarify something that Bridget said. Just as a chemist, I feel I have to correct the record. Methane is not a hot molecule per se. It's one of the most stable things we have, and that's part of the problem. It is, however, very bad for global warming because it absorbs many times, orders of magnitude more energy coming in and holds it here compared to CO2. So it is much more dangerous for global warming, but there is no sense in which it is hot other than that.
Any other comments from the other two candidates?
Sure, I'm happy to respond to that, but the point is it's very dangerous and it makes the planet hotter, and that's what we have to make sure we're not handing it over to the oil industry to make those decisions. We need people who have been in the trenches, who understand the subtleties and have the relationships to be able to move forward with environmental policy with a real sense of understanding. For instance, the oil drilling that was proposed under the Trump administration, that's something that I was a champion on, and we actually got them to take the proposed leases along the Atlantic coast off the table because it was recognized, because of Steve Engelbright, because of Steve Ballone, because of folks at the table when we ordered that there be hearings locally. We were saying you cannot destroy our coastline with the threat of an oil spill or even oil rigs off the coastline. That's the kind
Thank you.
of
Please finish up.
I want to bring to bear.
Thank you.
All right, our next topic is going to be on immigration and racial justice. And here's our question. Our current congressman has been no friend to our immigrant brothers and sisters, both nationally and locally, from his support to building the wall and from holding men, women, and children in detention camps and voting no on the Farm Workforce Modernization Act passed by the House. He has also supported repeal of DACA and has voted for state and local governments to comply with ICE to detain undocumented immigrants in our congressional district. As a member of Congress, you will have the responsibility to introduce and pass legislation on issues of immigration. How will your votes differ from those of our current congressmen? And the order in which the questions will be answered is as follows. Nancy Goroff, Bridget Fleming, and Perry Gershon. Nancy?
Thank you, Myrna. I can't honestly think of a way that they won't differ on these issues from Lee Zeldin. I got into this race, I started thinking about it seriously in fall of 2018, in the run up to the election then, when Trump and Zeldin and their cohort were talking about the caravan that was coming to invade our country. I'm sure you all remember how they described a group of refugees walking across Mexico as if they were an invasion that was an existential threat to our country. Meanwhile, climate change is no big deal, right? And I knew we do face a real existential threat in climate change, and those refugees were no threat to us. We need to be living up to our American values. I believe very strongly that America is stronger because it is a country of immigrants. My grandparents came here as immigrants, and not all of them legally. My grandfather jumped ship off of a merchant marine ship in Maryland and made his way to Chicago, and I
Could you please finish up,
living
Nancy?
the American dream because of it. We need to have a humane policy that is helping immigrants be successful and recognizing how important they are to our economy and who we are as a people.
Thank you. Bridget Fleming.
Thank you. Yeah, well, on the county legislature, I have been engaged to a certain extent in the issue only because there has been pressure on local law enforcement to engage in civil enforcement under ICE. I sit on the public safety, I'm actually the vice chair of the public safety committee because I spent almost a decade as an assistant district attorney. And so from that vantage point, I can see I can sort of keep an eye on whether there's pressure to do that under, for instance, the 387G agreements that have been enforced in Texas and other places that require or allow local law enforcement to be deputized to do ICE enforcement. I can assure you that's not happening in Suffolk County, and I'm proud to say that I have been an outspoken opponent of such a measure and have been asking tough questions at the legislature to ensure that that's not happening. But look, when I get to Congress with my team, we have to ensure that there is courage behind actions that will move us toward comprehensive immigration reform. The immigration system is broken. We need to restore DACA. We need a clean DACA bill. We need to restore TPS. We need to ensure that families are never separated at the border and that children are never kept in cage-like conditions. The Trump administration, with all the backing in the world by our Congressman Lee Zeldin, who comes from our part of the world, which really makes so little sense to me, this administration and Lee Zeldin go right for the race baiting at any given moment, right for the race-based fear. We don't need to behave that way. There is a way for us to ensure that we have secure borders and good enforcement of laws that are fair, laws that are humane, and laws that are fairly and humanely enforced.
Thank you. Please finish up.
Those things we have an opportunity to enact. Most of the country supports them, but we can't just go. We need the courage of our leaders to do that. And I think I've got that a proven record. I'm looking forward to doing it on Capitol Hill.
Thank you. And Perry?
Thank you, Myrna. We absolutely need comprehensive immigration reform in this country. Immigration is too much of an issue dividing us. The Trump administration is trying to use it as a wedge to drive one American against another. It is totally wrong what they did, separating children from their families and putting them in cages at the border. And to some extent, they're doing it again now, using COVID as an excuse to restore some of the really bad policy that they carried out in the past. We absolutely must find a path for our dreamers, not only to stay in this country, but ideally a path to citizenship. We must take care of our TPS recipients here, and it's wrong to suggest the idea of sending them back. These people have no other home now but America, and they are the people who qualify these programs have committed no crimes here other than being in America in the first place. These are people who could contribute to our communities. I cared so much about this issue that in May, Lisa and I went on a trip to the Arizona border for 4 days to observe what was happening and get a feel for what is right and wrong in our border policy and ideas on what we can do better. I was so struck by seeing a family of school children on their way back to Mexico and late in the afternoon. And I asked, why are they going unescorted? These school children, and I was told these are kids who have Mexican parents but were born in America. Their parents were forced back to Mexico, so they live in
Please
Mexico,
finish up.
come to school in America. We must do better. Lee Zeldin is always on the wrong side on immigration. He uses it to divide us, and we've got to use remember our roots. America is built on immigrants, and we must do better.
Thank you. The next question is on racial justice. We are faced with systemic racism in our congressional district, from incarceration to education to housing inequality to healthcare, transportation, and many, many more areas of concern. For example, COVID-19 is ravaging many of our Black and Hispanic communities. This disease threatens us all, but people in these communities are dying at a far higher rate than those in segregated white communities. How will you work to change this and other manifestations of systemic racism? And the order in which this question will be answered is Bridget Fleming, then Perry Gershon, then Nancy Goroff. Bridget?
Thank you. Well, clearly that the point that you make, or the questioner makes, about the impact of COVID on communities of color is absolutely true. It's why we immediately instituted drive-in testing sites in 6 underserved communities when we started to see those clusters appear. The chief of police is overseeing a program that distributes masks to folks in underserved communities who are on the street and perhaps don't have the kind of education to understand how to protect themselves with the proper PPE. But you're absolutely right. There is systemic racism throughout Long Island, and I think it's one of the reasons why Lee Zeldin's message resonates, why the president's message resonates, and it's why we are called upon as leaders to stand up and say this isn't right. Just the other day on a county phone call, somebody mentioned the distribution of masks to day laborers, and two Republican legislators issued a press release the following day expressing outrage that someone was doing that. Well, first of all, it's a public health issue to be able to address communities that are underserved, whether it's through public health initiatives or educational initiatives or funding initiatives. That serves all of us. It makes all of us better, especially in a pandemic. But the issue—
Thank you. Please finish. Please finish up.
Food insecurity, whether it's housing, we need to do investigation of the housing circumstance here. We need to be clear-eyed and understand this is a very real problem and tackle it head on.
Perry Gershon.
So the real question at hand is, why are minority communities being hit hardest with COVID? And not just on Long Island, it's a problem throughout America, but we're certainly seeing it here. In certain communities have had higher incidence rates and higher death rates. And we need to take steps to stop that. It's not that these people are different. And the issue is, to a large extent, they don't have access to the same level of education or healthcare that the rest of us do. We need to be getting testing into these communities as a priority. If you tell everyone, stay at home, shelter in place, except essential workers can go out, well, the people in these communities are often the ones who are doing the deliveries or working as the cashiers in our supermarkets. And they are getting exposed more than the rest of us to community spread because they're just having to interact more because of their jobs. You see it nationally in meatpacking warehouses. It's the minorities who end up taking these lower wage jobs that are the essential work. So we've got to make testing, tracing, and masks, PPE, a priority to get them to these communities. Congress needs to act this way. And if I were in Congress, I would have voted for the HEROES Act last Friday, which Zeldin voted against, and seen to it that we take better steps to take care of the people who most urgently need it.
Thank you. Nancy Goroff.
Thank you. It's been truly a tragedy to see, and it's unconscionable the way that our populations and communities have been affected disproportionately, and especially our minority communities have borne the brunt of this COVID-19 outbreak in ways that my community in Stony Brook has not. It's however, not a surprise, because it's really an outgrowth of a much more serious underlying situation. Of course, we have people who are in lower income areas have to work. They aren't able to stay home and work from home in their jobs. They need to go in and work at the grocery store or as part of our public transportation system or as nursing aides in our nursing homes. All of these things make them more exposed. But fundamentally, it goes well beyond that. Diabetes is a key predictor for having serious repercussions from COVID-19. Heart conditions are a key predictor. And these are things that disproportionately also affect our minority communities. We've seen from the Newsday expose that was published last year that housing is not fairly offered to people depending on the color of their skin. It's not simply a socioeconomic issue, it's also a racial issue, that we have significant racial profiling here. We absolutely need to take action at a federal level to make sure that our fair housing laws are followed. We also need to take action to make sure that everyone has access to health care, not just during COVID-19, but throughout. We need to have universal health care so that people don't develop these conditions like diabetes and heart conditions at disproportionate rates. And we need to make sure that we don't have food deserts where people can't get access to high quality food and therefore are forced to eat the unhealthful stuff that is subsidized through our food policies in this country. These are all major issues that are underlying this real tragedy that we need to address now.
Thank you. We now have an audience question from Laura. The killing of a young Black jogger in Georgia named Ahmaud Arbery has once again galvanized activists into the political debate. The killing comes at a time of racial pain and injustice, not only nationally, but in our congressional district. The view of many Black and Hispanic leaders is that we are at a low point with our nation's politics, remaining heavily divided by race. What will you do as a member of Congress to confront the issues of racial disparity and police brutality? And the order in which this question will be answered is as follows: Perry Gershon, Nancy Goroff, and Bridget Fleming. Perry.
We must address racial inequality in America. And for too long, we've allowed a situation to go really in the wrong direction. And the election of Trump has made things a whole lot worse than they were before. Trump and Zeldin really play on people's xenophobia to push their agenda and to find ways to divide us. We've got to make America fairer. We need to bring back a middle class, but we also need to bring back a standard of living that's acceptable to the people who are less well off, the people who don't have the same advantages that the rest of us have. And healthcare is probably the best example. And we need to make sure everyone in America has access to healthcare. It's a right, it's not a privilege. And if we don't do that, if we have a system that goes in the wrong direction, the people who don't have access can't get enough medication. So they take half or a quarter of the proper dosage. And then their diabetes or their cholesterol ranges out of proportion and they're more vulnerable. So
thank you, please finish up.
We need a policy that just brings medicine, access to medicine available to everyone at a cost that people can afford. And that's really the right first step.
Nancy Goroff.
Thank you for this question. The death of Ahmaud Arbery shows that beyond socioeconomic disparities, which certainly do still exist and need to be addressed, we have racial hatred and racial, we have biases that are implicit and explicit towards people of different races that cause real harm. I have heard many people say, and I think we can't be argued, that if the people who were storming the Michigan Capitol were Black with all of their AR-15s and so on, they would not have been allowed to storm it. Meanwhile, an innocent man who is jogging, clearly jogging, was not only chased down and then shot and very tragically killed, but then his killers were let off initially because they were just defending themselves, where defending themselves is defined as chasing down an innocent man who is jogging.
Thank you. Please finish up.
Behind that must be addressed, and they must be addressed by speaking out and talking about how important it is to give everyone a fair chance, recognizing our implicit biases and moving beyond them.
Thank you. Bridget Fleming, please.
The federal government has played a critical role in righting racial injustice since the 1960s with the Civil Rights Act, and should continue to do to this day. Unfortunately, under the Trump administration, with the full support of our congressmen, the Department of Justice has been completely inactive when it comes to enforcing civil rights laws and equal justice. This example of this young man being brutally shot down on a beautiful suburban street in Georgia is a horrifying reminder of what we've seen over and over again in the country. We're at a dangerous point in our nation's history. The bully pulpit of the administration and cronies like Lee Zeldin, who just was in Camp David a couple days ago, along with Elise Stefanik and Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows and Devin Nunes and Donald Trump. These folks are quick to move toward race hatred and baiting the fear that will keep them elected. That is something that we have a responsibility to reverse. And one of the ways we do it is by fully engaging the Department of Justice, enabling them with the kind of tools and support that they've had historically since the 1960s to right some of these wrongs, to insist on diversity in law enforcement, to insist on the proper investigation of a crime like the Ashbury, Ahmaud Ashbury case in Georgia.
Thank you. Please finish up.
If I could just mention Marcelo Lucero here in Patchogue, triggered the brutal death of Marcelo Lucero triggered action by the United States Department of Justice that we have to answer to this day, to keep moving forward with language access, with diversity of hiring, with fair treatment of everyone in the justice system. The national government did that, the federal government did that, and they are now without power. We need to restore that power.
Thank you. Before we move to the next topic, does anyone have any other comments on this particular issue? And if you could limit your response to 30 seconds, it would be on immigration and racial justice.
Myrna, am I on?
Oh, yes, Perry, please.
I just want to add one thing. If you look at the comments from the president that he makes in regard to what happens in America, that sets an example for the rest of us. And Donald Trump did not call out what happened in Charlottesville back in 2017. Donald Trump said nothing about what happened in Georgia. And when you do that, you condone bad policy. And that's why you see racial tensions on the rise. That's why you see anti-Semitism on the rise. And we must do better, and leadership matters. Trump
30 seconds, thank you.
Setting the example that we need.
Nancy, please.
Thank you. So absolutely leadership matters, and it should be noted that Trump actually tweeted this weekend in support of the Setauket Patriots, our favorite group across the street from you guys. Actually, between where you demonstrate and where we have our campaign headquarters, if we ever get back to him, campaign headquarters, Trump tweeted in favor of the Setauket Patriots this weekend while Zeldin was hanging out with him at Camp David, rather than standing up for freedom of the press and that journalists should be allowed to do their work.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to pass on the next part of this program to to Bruce Barry from the North Country Peace Group, and he's going to introduce the next line of questioning. Thank you, all candidates.
Thank you.
Thank you, Myrna, and thank you all the candidates for being with us tonight in these rather extraordinary times. My first question will have to do with the COVID-19 crisis. The current COVID-19 pandemic, with a second wave likely in the fall, will have profound health and economic effects on Long Island that will likely extend for years. What do you see as the federal government's role in responding to this crisis on both the local and national levels? And the order of responses will be Nancy Goroff, Bridget Fleming, and Perry Gershon. Nancy.
Thank you, Bruce, so much for that question. Clearly, this is the issue for us right now. And here it has hit people so hard. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't know someone who has had COVID-19, and so many people have lost loved ones. And it's because of a complete abdication of their responsibilities by the federal government, in particular, the Trump administration. We need to make sure that we have free testing for everyone for COVID-19, that we have ample tests and supplies. We still do not have enough supplies for everyone to get tested who needs it. We need to make sure that we are not pushing medications that are dangerous and have dangerous side effects, that the science leads everything. And we need the federal government to get us out of the economic crisis by providing aid. Only the federal government has the resources to do that. And we need to make sure that the aid is going to the people who need it. The bills that have been passed so far are all important. We need to make sure that the money is properly spent, especially in the PPP program, that there is proper oversight. The HEROES Act, which has not been passed by the Senate yet, and which
please do finish up.
Against, provides really important aid to New York State and to our municipalities, and we need to have that passed. Always, we need to have science guiding us, because we can't solve the economic problem until we solve the public health problem.
Thank you. Bridget Fleming.
Thank you. The leadership or lack thereof of the administration in the face of this crisis is truly unconscionable. And I have to say, Congressman Zeldin has stepped in to provide and used his cozy relationship with the president for both to engage the municipal facilities fund and to, the municipal liquidities fund, and also to provide some supplies. But we never should have been here in the first place. And the president that he supports and has been spending time with in the past few days at Camp David has failed miserably in protecting the American public. First of all, by underplaying the threat in January and by issuing outright lies about what the threat really entailed. Prior to that, the Trump administration dismantled the pandemic response team at the National Security Council, a critical, fatal by thousands and thousands of people who've lost their lives, a fatal mistake. By refusing to take the test that was offered by the World Health Organization and later outrageously withdrawing funding from the World Health Organization, he has disengaged himself from the international community and international understanding of science and put us further at threat. He did not implement the Defense Procurement Act to ensure that we started rolling out the kind of supplies we needed, including ventilators and protective equipment, and
Thank you.
including
Please finish up.
the components of the tests that would have allowed us. The CDC was not properly led. They didn't have the testing available in time, and even so prevented the local departments of health from doing their own testing. I could go on and on. It's been a dismal failure. We need to step up, take science seriously, and take back control of New York One.
Thank you. Perry Gershon?
Thanks for the question. And there's no doubt that the Trump administration took a bad problem and made it many, many, many times worse. We should have taken it seriously and prepared as soon as we became aware of it. We should not have removed the preparedness that Obama had set in place before we had even heard of COVID. But once we knew, we were so slow to develop any kind of response. We denied it for a long time. And then as we became aware of it and things went into chaos, Trump wouldn't take ownership. The federal government should have taken charge of developing tests quickly and rolling them out to the states and of getting PPE to the states. Instead of telling states you're on your own and having one state bid against another for PPE resources, the federal government should have been acting as the agent for the people most hit. So that's one thing. The second thing is we need to come out of this. We need two steps. We need a health component and we need an economic component. We need testing. We need contact tracing. We need to take the steps necessary to make people feel comfortable that it's safe to go out.
Please finish up.
Be able to control the virus and make people think it's under control, or they're not going to go out and spend money. And then we need to take the steps that Congress has been taking under the CARES Act to actually help people get through this crisis economically. And hopefully I'll get a chance later to talk about what Zeldin did wrong voting against the HEROES Act this past Friday. But he shorted money to New York State. He shorted money for testing. He didn't take the necessary steps we need if we're going to dig ourselves out. He went against us.
Thank you. The next question was formed from two questions, actually, that were submitted by audience members, Jen and Kelly. What ideas do you have for the federal government to address the growing food insecurity and housing needs resulting from the COVID-19 crisis? And what path forward towards a more humane and sustainable world do you envision, rather than simply returning to the pre-virus status quo? And the order of responses will be Bridget Fleming, Perry Gershon, Nancy Goroff. Bridget? Muted. Bridget, you're muted. If you can hear.
We just unmute. You were.
Oh my gosh, I was just.
Okay, start over, please.
You missed it all. No, I'm very grateful for the question because it is something that I think is incumbent upon us leaders to recognize that we have an opportunity here to approach our lives as we reopen the economy with a fresh idea of what works and what doesn't work. Vulnerabilities in our communities have been exposed, and the questioner points out food insecurity, housing insecurity. Those were things that were present in Suffolk County and in CD1 long before COVID. And thank goodness for the stimulus packages. It helped those that were eligible for the stimulus package. But there are those in our communities that are not. And I've stood in the parking lot and watched hundreds of cars come by to pass out food assistance to people who are currently really struggling. It's a frightening thing. As a county legislator, you know, my team and I spend often all day long trying to handle constituent concerns, whether it's small businesses who are scared they're not going to be able to hold on, or people who are afraid they're going to be evicted from their homes, people with food insecurity. So there are a lot of things that are being exposed here, but we have an opportunity to move forward with a cleaner, more humane approach to our economy.
Thank you. Please finish up.
If we take the right steps, we mustn't buckle under to fear, where in limited resources, people start to say, I have mine, and that's all that's important. What we need to do is understand we can reshape our economy, reshape our structures so that we are inclusive of everyone and have a more stable long-term strategy for ensuring that everyone participates in a vital and healthy economy.
Okay. Perry Gershon?
Bruce, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. What ideas do you have for the federal government to address the growing food insecurity and housing needs resulting from the COVID-19 crisis? And what path forward towards a more humane and sustainable world do you envision, rather than simply trying to return to the pre-virus status quo?
Thank you. So as the question points out, there are really two issues that we need to address. There's the immediate term. People are starving. People are out of work. People are not able to pay their rent. People are not able to make their mortgage payments. People are unable to buy food to eat on the kitchen table. And we need to find ways to get food to people as best we can. And we're going in the wrong direction there. I mean, the federal government's making it harder for people to get SNAP payments. That is just terrible public policy in a situation like we have today. And the government's job is to get as much food to people as possible, and that is what the SNAP program is all about. So we need to fund it. It's got to be a priority. Longer term, we're going to need to dig out of a massive unemployment problem. We can't do it until it's safe for people to come out, whether that means enough tracing and testing is here that we can control the outbreak, or if it takes us getting a vaccine first. But we will need a public policy to dig out of this economy. And let's do it by investing in good infrastructure. Let's make it, as I mentioned in an earlier answer, a clean energy economy in places like Long Island, where we can produce $40 a week, $40 an hour jobs for people, and really get employment going along with digging out of the economy. That is how we
finish up.
People's lot going forward. And we need good union jobs. We need to create a good economy for people, and that's how you get out of a recession anyway. Good public works, path forward. Thank you.
Nancy Goroff.
Thank you, Bruce. It is truly critical that we make sure that we address these problems and these inequities that have been laid bare by COVID-19. They didn't start with COVID-19, but they have become so much more visible to us. They've also, I think, COVID-19 has redefined our understanding of what is essential, right? Suddenly we have essential workers who are being paid minimum wage. They're so essential, but they are not being paid a living wage. We need to make sure that all our workers are paid a living wage. We also need to make sure that our food policies are not based on what's best for the enormous agribusiness corporations that currently are the main benefactors of our food policy. In every sector of our agriculture, we have tremendous consolidation among very few companies. We need to diversify our food sources, make sure that we have small food producers and smaller food distributors that will give us greater diversity and greater redundancy.
Thank you. Please finish up.
We need to make sure that every person can access high nutrition value foods near their home. Right now, our minority and lower income populations have to go very far, not only for work, but also just to get good groceries for their families.
Thank you. We're going to switch topics now. This next topic deals with perpetual war and the war economy.
I'm sorry, were you going to give us a little wrap-up moment for that topic? We had a wrap-up moment for other topics.
We were going to skip it because all of you have been running well over the 1 minute that we were asking for.
We don't have timers. I guess that's the problem. Okay.
Yes.
I don't think
I'm trying to interrupt once you get to like 1 minute and 15 seconds or so.
Okay, sorry. I don't think we addressed the health care crisis that has been exposed by COVID, and so I just wanted to add that to the list as well.
I think that will come up later if we have the time. We have a number of other questions that we want to make sure we're able to address also. And then if there's anything anybody wants to say that they didn't get to say in the concluding statements, you'll be able to do that.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so back to the next question, which will address perpetual war and the war economy. The current U.S. wars of nearly 20 years have cost hundreds of thousands of lives and nearly $6 trillion and counting, with no end in sight. There is little incentive to strive for peace due to the business of wars yielding huge profits to military contractors and weapons manufacturers. If elected, how will you challenge this deeply entrenched system of perpetual war? And the order of answers will be first Perry Gershon, Nancy Goroff, Bridget Fleming. Perry?
I remember back in the day when Bill Clinton was president, and we talked about something called the peace dividend. And we were talking about how to make an economy really run without spending so much on foreign wars. And then something happened in 2001, something horrible. We were essentially invaded at 9/11. And as a result of that, we started on a course of war, and which is what this question talks about. And our involvement abroad has been really something very difficult for us to pull out of. We do need to shift away from it. It's one of the few points Donald Trump has made that's factually correct, except the actions he's taken are not getting it done. We need to find a way to bring troops home, to lower our presence there, but not take everyone out immediately. If we do that, then the purposes we were there for will get overwhelmed. So we need to keep certain special forces there, but bring home the bulk of our troops and put those dollars to work towards rebuilding the economy. We need, more than anything else, to be investing in our nation, in infrastructure. And
Thank you. Please finish up.
We got to bring Americans back to work, and that's going to become the priority going forward.
Nancy Goroff?
Thank you, Bruce. I think these groups here, you guys understand this better than anyone because you've been out there fighting for this for years, and I commend you for it. We need, obviously, to not only protest, although I think the protests are important, we need to have real action from our government. We can't just pull out as Donald Trump did and then undid in Syria, turning our backs on our allies, opening them up to much greater dangers than if we had just stayed there in the first place. We need to be smart, and we need to invest much more heavily in diplomacy. We have seen that the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq could go on forever. And this is something that Donald Trump got right in talking about them as forever wars. But the only way we're going to end them is by standing with our allies, investing in diplomacy, and pulling out in a way that is careful and makes sense. We need to do that, and we need to invest in diplomacy throughout the world because we've never fought as many wars as there are, as many problems as there are with war.
Thank you. Bridget Fleming?
Thank you. Well, I think the question does certainly highlight the outsized influence of special interests in our government and in government spending, and it's a toxic problem that pervades all aspects of government. Certainly, we can find places in the military budget that are being driven by special interests. So that, for instance, we should not be investing in reviving or continuing to produce outdated weapon systems. On the other hand, we need to ensure that we are able to reinstate the position of America in the international community and the respect for America in the international community, which certainly means engaging in diplomacy, respecting our allies, reinstating our position, for instance, to refuse Russia re-entry into the G8. But also we need to ensure that we're loyal supporters and defenders of our allies so that, for instance, our abandonment of the Kurds in Syria doesn't happen again. I don't believe that it's possible to just simply move out of the many places we're engaged in the world. We need to recognize the role that a strong America plays in peace and stability, the support and defense of democracy democracies and humane approaches to government, that a strong America that will, can carry forward. But
Thank
that
you.
we
Please
only
finish up.
have the respect that we need to reestablish that we've lost under the Trump and Zeldin administration.
Thank you. The next question was submitted by an audience member, Michael, and it reads as follows. The federal military budget is well over $700 billion annually, almost 60% of the federal discretionary budget. Do you think this is appropriate? If so, why? And if you think it is too much, where and by how much would you seek to cut it? The order of answers will be Nancy Goroff, Bridget Fleming, and Percy Gershon.
Thank you, Bruce. As I already said, I do think we need to be investing much more heavily in diplomacy. We are spending a small fraction of our total budget in outward-facing activities on diplomacy and much too large a fraction on military spending. And that military spending is often with very poor outcomes. I think all of the research shows that the best outcomes, the most efficient dollars are spent on diplomacy and not on war. So even just from a purely practical economic standpoint, we should be investing in diplomacy over military. Then you add in the moral component of needing to have a leadership position in the world and not putting our guns for hire, as Donald Trump famously said. He was willing to go to fight for Saudi Arabia because they're willing to pay for it. We must not become a mercenary army. We need to support our allies, both through standing up with them, sticking with them when we've told them we'll be there, and finding ways to end wars that are forever wars. And we also need to stick with our allies in agreements such as the Paris Accord and so many others, where these are not only the basis of peacetime activity, they will help us with creating peace in the world.
Thank you. Please finish up.
Thank you. Bridget Fleming?
Thank you. Well, the coronavirus crisis has certainly reshaped our entire economy, and we still don't even know where it ends or where it's headed. So we have to understand that as government actors, we have to recognize that budgeting is priorities. And when you come to a place where we're going to be, where families are threatened with food insecurity, housing insecurity, businesses are threatened with closing their doors and jobs being lost and services being lost, we are going to need to be able to invest in our economy in a way that won't necessarily allow us to invest in outdated military systems, other fat that may be driven by special interest defense lobbyists. So we have to take a hard look at that without sacrificing the strength of America. There are going to be opportunities here to allow us to reshift our priorities, but we have to understand that we need affordable and universal healthcare accessible to everyone. We need housing that is accessible to everyone. We need education and food and an opportunity for each person to have a job that offers dignity and security in benefits as well as in the future. Those are opportunities that we have now as we revisit our priorities on the other side of this.
Thank you. Please finish up.
Okay, sorry. Okay, thank you. We have an opportunity here to reshape our priorities, and we may have to look at some of the outsized military spending to address other more critical things right now without losing the strength of the American military.
Thank you. Perry Gershon?
The United States right now is at war. I mean, Trump has said it, and I agree. We're at war with coronavirus, with COVID-19, and we must defeat it. Defeating it means not only getting the epidemic under control, making it safe for Americans to go out and not feel like they're going to get sick when they go out, but also making it go away completely, worldwide. The whole world is at war with this virus. So we must cooperatively develop a vaccine to end it. That's the way you stop it. But then the battle's not over. We have to rebuild. We have to rebuild the economy. We need to create jobs back in this country. The hotel industry is devastated. The restaurant industry is devastated. The retail industry is devastated. We have to find ways to make the engine that makes America work start chugging again. And if that means shifting some of our priorities away from defense, that's what it means. Without compromising our security, we've got to find a way to rebuild this country, because that is how we win the biggest war that any of us have ever faced.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have one more question dealing with defense and war, and that is with military veterans. The tragic consequences of war have resulted in an epidemic rate of suicide among our veterans. And access to health care, especially psychiatric care, is inadequate, and there are staffing shortages in our VA hospitals. What do you propose to correct this problem? Oh, in the order of answers, I'm sorry. Be Bridget Fleming, Perry Gershon, Nancy Goroff.
I'm proud to sit on the Veterans Committee in the county legislature, and as such have taken action such as ensuring that female veterans at Northport have access to a female gynecologist if that's what they choose. I was happy to marshal the forces of some building industry folks out east to supply coveralls to the Stony Brook, Long Island Veterans Home, which was critically impacted by COVID, and was they were very happy to have some assistance with regard to PPE from my team as we were able to get that done. Because look, our veterans have put their lives on the line for us, and the way they're treated by our country is still certainly not adequate. Homeless veterans deserve all the support we can possibly muster. Homelessness in the veteran population is unconscionable. We have one of the largest veterans populations in the United States here in Suffolk County, and we see therefore the impacts of war and the impacts of mistreatment on our veteran community, whether it's mental health issues, homelessness, food insecurity, or simply not getting the access to health care that they need. We need
Thank you. Please finish up.
The Veterans Administration has to be fully funded and competently administered, and the hospitals that serve the military need to be fully supported as well.
Perry Gershon.
Thank you. Our veterans put their lives at risk and sacrifice their families in order to protect the rest of us. And when they come home, they deserve the best, period. Right now, they're not getting that. The idea of the VA is to provide the best health care for veterans, and we're falling short. We're falling short locally, we're falling short nationally. The answer is not privatization. In fact, that's the worst thing we can do. The answer is to make sure that the VA system provides the top level of health care humanly possible to our veterans, because that's what they deserve. And that's got to include mental health. And when our veterans come here, they often have a challenge to get reincorporated into society. And when they don't, many of them don't get the mental health resources that they need, they fall off the grid a little bit. And that contributes to a homeless problem. That's wrong. Every time you see a veteran who's homeless, your heart should cry out that society has let them down. We must do better. And as homelessness is growing post-COVID, we especially need to devote resources to it. We need to acknowledge the problem, and we need to take care of it. Make sure our veterans are getting the top-notch.
Thank you. Please finish up.
and make sure that they're not going homeless. Make sure they're getting the mental health care that they need. Thank you.
Nancy Goroff.
Thank you. Excuse me. We owe a special debt to our veterans. They have gone and put their lives on the line for us. We first of all need to make sure that that has not been a needless exercise, that we are taking our responsibility towards them very seriously in not getting into wars just on a whim of a reckless president, or putting troops in danger by making foreign policy by tweet. That's the first step. When our veterans come home, we need to make sure that they have access to high quality, affordable health care. We need to make sure that the Veterans Administration is providing high quality care, not through privatization, but through maintaining quality in the VA. It would help if we had somebody in charge of the VA who actually had expertise in this. Over and over again, this administration has sidelined people with expertise and pushed them out in favor of friends of the president and cronies. We need to make sure that we are really addressing these problems from a point of facts and evidence. For example, when we talk about problems with addiction, we need to make sure that we are using medically based treatments that are shown to work.
Thank you. Please finish
In
up.
all of these areas, we need to do the best we can for our veterans because we owe them that.
Thank you. Do you have any further comments on this topic? Anyone? Okay. At this time, I'd like to introduce our next panelist. Her name is Michelle Santantonio from the South Country Peace Group.
Good evening. Thank you for making yourself available to be with us this evening. I'm going to direct some questions regarding the global nuclear threat. Do you agree that the abolition of nuclear weapons is an essential step to promoting the security and well-being of all peoples? And if so, as our CD1 representative, will you pledge to promote the ratification of and adherence to the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW? And the order for response will be Perry Gershon, Nancy Goroff, and Bridget Fleming. Thank you.
Nuclear weapons are a threat to society. They were developed in the end of World War II. Initially, they ended the war. But we ended up going from there to a weapons race with the Soviet Union that went through the 60s and 70s. And eventually, we started non-proliferation treaties, which we signed with the Soviet Union, and started taking steps in the right direction. The goal is to reduce the nuclear threat, containing how many countries can have it, preventing it from getting in ill hands, and controlling what could be a disaster for any one of us. We need to do more of that. Right now, we're going in the wrong direction, and Trump is actually letting some of the nuclear treaties with Russia expire. That is absolutely the wrong policy. To your question, can we unilaterally disarm? No. Can everyone disarm all at once? Maybe. And it's certainly a great ideal to try to strive for. But if you do that, you need to make sure that no one cheats. Because if one person has a nuclear weapon while we're all trying to de-nuke, that's a disaster. So it's an ideal, but I'm not sure
Please finish up.
It's a realistic spot to ever expect to get to, at least not near term.
Thank you. Ms. Goroff.
Thank you. Nuclear weapons make this world more dangerous, and we need to do everything we can to reduce the number of nuclear weapons in the world, including the number in the United States arsenal. We need to make sure that we do not allow the so-called modernization of our nuclear weapons arsenal which is code for replacing old weapons with newer weapons, including so-called tactical nuclear weapons, which could be temptation for some commander-in-chief in the future, if we were ever to have a commander-in-chief who would be tempted by use of nuclear weapons. Tactical nuclear weapons are a danger because they have all of the fallout of the larger strategic nuclear arsenal, but are much more likely to be used by somebody and much more likely to lead to a nuclear war. We also need to move off of hair trigger alert. Unfortunately, this is something that the Obama administration declined to do, but it is something which will increase our safety. There is no reason for our weapons to be on hair trigger alert. It makes the world more dangerous.
Thank you.
They're
Please finish
all
up.
important changes that I will strongly advocate for, and they're all based on facts, evidence, and science.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, certainly the threat of nuclear devastation is a horrifying one, and it is critically important for leaders to ensure that we are not in a position to see that devastation occur. And so certainly we need to reduce the amount of nuclear weapons in the world. However, and certainly also to ensure that bad actors like Iran do not have nuclear capabilities like North Korea, that we need to work within nuclear treaties to use the tools that are available to us as an international community, not just as America acting impulsively without any long-term strategic goals or long-term sensible and reasonable strategy. So we need to rely on our international allies and partners to ensure the stability of the regions around the world that are threatened by the threat of nuclear weapons falling into the hands of bad actors. That being said, I do not think at this point it's possible to enact the UN ban if it means the United States needs to unilaterally disarm our nuclear arsenal, because it is critically important that the United States retain a level of strength in the world that will ensure security, humane treatment, humane civilization.
Thank you. Please finish up.
And the defense of democracy. Okay, so I think it's very important that we recognize the threat. We also have to be realistic about how we can go about reducing the threat without ourselves disarming unilaterally.
Thank you. My next question. President Trump is saying he won't sign to extend the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty unless China joins in, although the original treaty was between Russia and the US, still holders of 90% of the world's nuclear weapons arsenals. If elected, will you work to extend this critical new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty beyond its February 2021 termination date? And the order in which to respond, Nancy Goroff, Bridget Fleming, and Perry Gershon. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I actually spent a fair amount of time last week learning about this issue in some detail from the Union of Concerned Scientists, where I've been a member for many years and was privileged to be part of their board meeting last week. Again, like so many things, on the front of it, it sounds reasonable to say China should be part of this treaty. But China's arsenal is so much smaller than ours or Russia's. They will never agree, and it has no practical meaning. It is simply a poison pill to try to destroy this treaty from the start. And it is a cynical move that should be called out. As a member of Congress, I will certainly be willing to take a strong stand on such things, recognizing that the House has very little direct impact on treaties, right? There is no place for members of the House to vote on treaties in one way or another, but it still gives us a bully pulpit from which we can talk about what truly will make America safer and where are the real risks based on the facts and the evidence. And as a scientist, I will always be looking to what are the real risks and what do we need to do to reduce those.
Thank you. Ms. Fleming.
The Trump administration's foreign policy, if it can be called a foreign policy, is destructive of the position of the United States in the world and the safety of the American public. That includes his cozying up to dictators in China, in North Korea, and in Russia. And so when we look at the START treaty and the suggestion that China be a part of it, we have to approach it with the skepticism and the lack of trust that the Trump administration should engender in each and every one of us as we start to analyze the steps that he takes. So I think that it's very important that we continue the treaty. I mean, we have to preserve what we can about the move toward reduction in the arms race with Russia, despite the fact that under Donald Trump, the United States has become, that Donald Trump himself has become so cozy with Vladimir Putin. That being said, we need to ensure that the relationship with China is clear and understood and moves in a long-term strategic way to ensure the safety of the United States and the people within the United States, as well as the international community. We don't see that happening because the Trump administration acts on impulse without any guidance from the United States Congress and without any understanding or effort to implement long-term strategy that will ensure the security of international communities.
Thank you. Please finish up.
The China thing is a red herring.
I remember I was in the car driving home from Brookhaven to East Hampton when I heard on the radio that Trump was talking about pulling out of the START treaty. And allowing the development of these missiles again. And I literally freaked out and said, what awful foreign policy? What is this world coming to? This treaty was signed by Ronald Reagan as a major advancement. It was a Republican administration pushing arms reduction to make the world a safer place. Who wants to make this treaty go away? Vladimir Putin. This has been Putin's objective for a long time. And all of a sudden, he has a friend and partner in Donald Trump who's playing his policy objective. Donald Trump is doing this, whether it's a favor to Putin or a favor to some defense contractor, it's going to make the whole world more dangerous. Take China out of it. They're not part of the equation. They're noise. They're Trump's normal distraction. This is Putin's foreign policy, and we are playing it. We absolutely cannot let ourselves pull out. And as a member of Congress, I will do everything in my power to stand up to advocate for remaining in this treaty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're muted.
Okay. You can all have up to 30 seconds if you want to respond on that topic further.
Well, I would just like to say that the extent to which Donald Trump has allied himself with Vladimir Putin should be a source of real concern and alarm for everyone in the United States. We're about to have another presidential election, and we still have a president who refuses to take seriously the idea that Russia interfered in the 2016 elections, even though every member of his national security team, every member of the intelligence community that answers to the president, top level people, are unequivocally
30 seconds, thank you.
Are unequivocally certain that that happened. It's a frightening thing, and we've got to change it.
Thank you. Further. Okay, I'd like to move to the next question on class identity and inequality. And it's a combination of questions from our panel and audience member Rita. Power brokers and moneyed special interests such as corporations, lobbyists, and the wealthy often have massive influence on elections, legislation, and national policies. What specific reforms would you advance to end the corrupting influence of money in politics? Will you, for instance, support a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United? And the order of response will be Bridget Fleming, Perry Gershon, and then Nancy Goroff.
I've already done it. So when I was on the Southampton Town Board, I was a leader in the fight against to overturn Citizens United, which had just happened before I was elected to the town board. I co-sponsored a resolution to accomplish that. On the Suffolk County Legislature, I was a co-sponsor of a public financing bill that begins in 2021 and creates a non-tax dollar fund that will support candidates who get a certain amount of funding with donations of $250,000 or less. It's a one-to-one match with the goal of removing the toxic influence of special interests in our elections. There's no question. We talked about the military budget. We can talk about polluters. We can talk about the NRA, for goodness sakes, which Zeldin has a perfect record on and gets plenty of money from. And there's no question that Citizens United introduced a level of inequality in our system that is no longer democratic. I will continue to fight the fight that I've been fighting to get that done, and I'm a proven ally on that issue, and you can count on me to do that. You're muted again, Michelle. You're muted again.
Trouble with my mute here. I'm sorry about that.
Michelle, you're okay now.
Okay. Thank you. All right, the next question was for.
And we were going to skip to the electability, right?
We
Yeah.
have not.
Anyway,
We haven't
Sorry,
answered
we
that.
didn't all answer this.
Answered
Excuse
that
me. My
question.
apologies.
That's okay.
so should I go?
Yes, Perry, please.
Thank you. The Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court was one of the most devastating hits to fairness in American elections, along with voter suppression that we've seen in recent times. But by allowing the Citizens United decision to go forward, super PACs are allowed to put endless amounts of money into an election, and there's no disclosure of where that money is coming from. We need to end that Citizens United decision, and the only way we're going to do that is by passing a constitutional amendment to fix it, or by changing the composition of the Supreme Court. It's looking at the moment like the amendment may be the easier tack to take, but I'm 100% for it. I was endorsed by the End Citizens United Union the last campaign, and I expect to be endorsed by them again come the general election. We must stop this decision. We need to get big money out of politics. We need to come to a time where our representatives answer to the people that they're there to represent. Lee Zeldin takes more money from corporate special interests than most members of Congress. We could talk about all the lobbies he takes from, but I'm not taking any money from corporate PACs. And
Thank you. Please finish up.
That is the proper public policy going forward. We need to have a campaign system that's financed by small individual donors. And quite frankly, we should have term limits as well. And I think that's the only way to have truly representative people elected to national office.
Thank you. Ms. Goroff.
We depend on our elections and our representative democracy to make sure that the will of the people, the needs of the people are being met by our government. I got into this race because I knew we need a government that's actually trying to make people's lives better and making policy based on facts and reality. And we are so far away from that right now. we need to have campaign finance reform, including a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. We also need to make sure that we protect people's right to vote by having reforms that make it easier to vote by mail. We know in New York we need to have a constitutional amendment to do that, and that is in process now. But we also need to make sure that there's fairness in voting, so that we don't have situations where in the city of Milwaukee there's a half a dozen voting places, while in the suburbs there are 24. We need to make sure that the Voting Rights Act is being protected and that it is protecting people's right to vote. And I will make all of those a priority when I'm a member of Congress.
Thank you. I would like to move to a new topic now, and I believe I'm reintroducing Susan Peretti. She has a question on electability.
Yes, hi. So this question, it was among those that the audience was asking about, and it is this: the three of you would likely vote the same as each other on most bills that would be presented to you in Congress. Many primary voters therefore feel that electability is perhaps the most important qualification to consider. What would make you the candidate most able to defeat Lee Zeldin in the general election? And the order in which this question will be answered is as follows: Nancy Goroff, Bridget Fleming, and Perry Gershon.
Thank you so much for that, Susan. If I'm elected, I'll be the first female PhD scientist ever to serve in Congress. That means that I bring unique skills and expertise to Congress to make a difference. It also means that I can appeal to people across the political spectrum. The group 314 Action, which has endorsed me, has also done polling in battleground districts like ours, which shows that people trust scientists and people with scientific backgrounds as candidates much more than they trust business leaders, business owners, or lawyers, or politicians. People understand that scientists have been trained to look at the facts, look at the evidence, and come to things with an open mind. So those swing voters will see my background as something that allows me to be outside the partisanship that they hate so much. At the same time, our base is very excited about having a scientist who will take meaningful action on issues like climate change and healthcare, and be a leader on these issues in a way that others cannot be because of my unique experience. Those things make me the most electable, and it's why I have over 6,000 individual donors to my campaign and have raised the most money in this campaign. Although I'm a first-time candidate, I've raised over $1.25 million already because people are so excited.
Bridget, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, you know, politics and government are complex and challenging, and experience and the relationships that have been built over the course of time are critically important, not only in performing well in a government function, but also in delivering on election day. I have run and won tough races 5 times in this district, including 3 times in the county legislature, where I've won by 60% of the vote or more. It's why, along with the record that I've built over all these years, which will draw a great contrast with Lee Zeldin, who's become so partisan, and has lost touch with the district. It's why I'm endorsed by Congresswoman Kathleen Rice, by Assemblyman Fred Thiel, by the presiding officer of the legislature, Rob Calarco, former presiding officer, the majority leader, 5 other members of the county legislature, 3 town supervisors, 4 village mayors, and numerous town council members, as well as IBEW Local 25. The reason why I have those endorsements is because I'm a proven ally I'm a proven I can produce results for my allies in a way that's been proven and people have faith in me to do that. That's why when we hit the general election and we start taking punches and having to hold Zeldin accountable and deliver punches, people who've been in the trenches with me know that I will be there, that I will be tenacious, that I will be a fighter, and that I have the wherewithal, the relationships, and the understanding of this district to pull it over the finish line and return New York 1 to the Democratic Party.
Thank you. And Perry?
Thanks. Well, I've been out campaigning for over 3 years now. I've traveled to all corners of this district, and people have gotten to know me. I've driven 70,000 miles in my Chevrolet Volt, saving energy, being environmentally conscious as I meet people, and really laid the groundwork for a successful campaign against Zeldin this fall. I have the endorsements of the PEF, the railroad engineers, and the Long Island Environmental Voters Forum. And these are unions representing essential workers, and they've stepped up and said, I am the right person. But I've had, because I'm so known, I've been able to drive people to our 10 town halls. Last September, we started a series of monthly town halls in various corners of this district. And we've done them in Republican areas and hit crowds of 50 to 120 people. We did 6 live town halls and 3 virtual events since COVID started. And people are showing up to listen to what I have to say because they know me. And that knowledge and that confidence that I get from that is why I'm going to be able to beat Lee Zeldin this fall. I've sat eye to eye and stared at Zeldin on the debate stage and won debates with him. That's the kind of comfort people should take. That experience level is what we need to finally win this seat back. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final question before we go to closing statements. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I leave someone out? I'm sorry.
No, I answered that. We had a chance to do a little follow-up.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
So, yeah, I just want to mention that I understand that Perry, you have run this race before, but what we want to do is win this race. And quite frankly, I understand that you have stared at Lee Zeldin's eyes in a debate, but you lost that race. And it was a good year for Democrats. We flipped the House in 2018. Mr. Gershon had the resources he needed. He worked very hard. He made his best shot, and he just came up short. It's not a judgment. It's why I'm in the race. We need somebody who has won, who can continue to win by putting together a coalition, a team, and the wherewithal to be able to actually pull this over the finish line. I think that's a really important thing, and that's why I'm in the race.
Okay.
Can I respond to that?
Yes. Yes. 30 seconds, please.
Here's the thing. I gave Lee Zeldin by far his tightest race that anyone has given. We took a year, 2016, where we really did not do well in this district, and we reunited the party in 2018 and really brought people out to vote. I gave people the confidence that we're able to win. And I did this starting from zero. I'm now at a point where people know me and have a level of comfort, and we almost got it done before. Lee Zeldin has moved further into Trump's camp right now. He is that much more vulnerable. Let's go with the person people know who's shown he can get things done here and carry on the momentum that almost got us there in 2018.
Thank you. Please finish up.
May I add something to this?
Nancy wants to add something. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. In order to win this election, we need to win in the town of Brookhaven. Winning in the Hamptons is not the same thing as winning in CD1. We need to win in Brookhaven. I am the one of the 3 candidates here who actually lives in Brookhaven and have for the past 23 years. And my connections through Stony Brook reach through every part of this district. We have every person in this district has a friend or a neighbor or a child who went through Stony Brook and whose life is better because of it. We can argue about this or that, what happened before, or whatever. We need to look forward. And looking forward means we need a candidate who will inspire voters. I'm excited to do that, and I'm excited by the response I've gotten from people.
Thank you. And this will be the final question, and then we'll go on to concluding statements rather, from the candidates. We received several questions about healthcare, and we've kind of gone to that a little bit already, but I would like to include this question from Lucille. Similar questions were submitted by William and Roger, and here it is. Whether you are for Medicare for all or have another idea for ensuring healthcare to all Americans, how do we as a country and a citizenry continue providing excellence in healthcare while keeping healthcare costs down? Would you, for instance, favor implementing universal healthcare? And we'll start with Bridget Fleming, and then Harry, and then Nancy.
I think it's critically important that we move forward toward universal, affordable healthcare. And we're seeing in the COVID crisis what the devastation can be when folks in the community do not have access to affordable healthcare. And we see it in the impact on communities of color, but we also see with this virus that it moves throughout our communities. And so if there are certain populations who are vulnerable and are not going to the doctor when they feel ill because they don't have insurance, that makes everyone else less secure in our public health. So it is critically important, and now's the time to seize on that understanding as we move forward past COVID. In the post-COVID world, one of our primary goals has to be getting universal, affordable health care right. We need to preserve the best parts of the Affordable Care Act, including coverage for pre-existing conditions, coverage for children up to 26. But we also need to ensure that we have lowered premiums, lowered prescription costs. We can do it in a number of ways, but the critical thing is now to seize the opportunity to recognize, because people have seen it, what a danger it is to all of us in our community when even one person cannot afford to take good care of their health. And so now we need a moment to move forward to fix ACA. We need to mend it, don't end it.
Thank you. Perry?
Healthcare is a right. It's not a privilege. And we get that as Democrats. It's not controversial among people who are here and who vote with us. We need to find a way to make sure everybody has access to healthcare. And the ACA took us a long way. It was the great achievement of the Obama administration. Trump and Lee Zeldin are doing everything in their power to undo it. Zeldin has voted against it time and time again, and they're now trying to, behind the Supreme Court's attempt to overturn the ACA. We've got to preserve it, and we need to improve it. We need a public option. We need to have a government entity that can compete with the private insurance companies to lower costs. In the COVID era, we see people losing their jobs. They are most exposed now to lack of health care. We must see that they can get healthcare insurance. We can't have people uncovered in this country. It just doesn't work. We need to make prescription drugs more affordable. And if we're going to do that, we need to let Medicare negotiate directly with the big drug companies. There was a bill in December to get that done in the House, and Zeldin voted against it. That's one of Zeldin's worst votes. And we need to make sure people understand that. We need to make sure we give people coverage for pre-existing conditions.
Thank you. Please finish up.
We make coverage universal and expand on the ACA with a public option. Thank you.
Hi, and now Nancy.
Thank you. Every American deserves access to high quality, affordable healthcare, full stop. And we do face a moment now when we can move things much more than may have been possible before. We need to make sure that people have the opportunity to buy into Medicare as a first step, where we are giving people access to Medicare through as a public option in the Affordable Care Act. We do need to make sure that the Affordable Care Act is not repealed and we need to protect pre-existing conditions. Another one of Zeldin's worst votes was voting against protecting pre-existing condition coverage. We need to make sure that prescription drug prices are under control, and certainly allowing Medicare to negotiate for prescription drugs is one key part of that. We also need to look at why prescription drug prices have gone up so much on things like insulin, where there is nothing new in the manufacture of insulin that would provide a reason for the huge increase in price. We need to make sure that we're holding not only pharmaceutical companies, but also the formulary distributors accountable.
Thank you. Please finish up.
And we need to make sure we shore up the Affordable Care Act, expand it, and get the 29 million people who still don't have health care coverage, get them on insurance.
If there are there any further comments on that, on the healthcare topic before we move on to the concluding statements?
I did forget to mention surprise billing, which is another. We've talked about the various aspects of the system that are not working and now, certainly high premiums, high prescription costs, difficult special interests, dominance in the discussion, but I think surprise billing is something we also have to attack. Just left that out. So thank you for the opportunity to add it.
Thank you. So now it's time for the candidates to make their concluding statements. Ask you to please limit your comments to 30 seconds. And the order in which you will speak is as follows: Perry Gershon, Nancy Goroff, and Bridget Fleming. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone in the North Country Peace Group and the South Peace Group. It's been my pleasure to address all the people on this call. I am the candidate who can best beat Lee Zeldin come November. As I said, I've been campaigning continuously for over 3 years. I've driven 70,000 miles. I've held 9 town halls so far. We're going to have 2 more before the primary. Leadership matters. People will fight for you when they see that you will fight for them. And that's what I'm here to do. But at the end of the day, we're all Democrats. We've got to come together and get behind whoever wins this primary. I think it should be me, but if it's Bridget or if it's Nancy, I'm there for them as well. I've run a positive campaign throughout, and I'm going to continue to do that. I think we've got to remember that whoever wins this primary is going to be the nominee, and darn well better have our support, because we've got to beat Zeldin come the fall. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Okay, and I lost track of who goes next.
I think it's me, Susan.
It's Nancy next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy.
We all have the same goal, which is to beat Lee Zeldin. And I am so proud of the support I have from people like Kara Hahn, Deputy Presiding Officer in the Suffolk County Legislature, and Kate Browning, who ran last time and is a former county legislator, and Emily's List, and 314 Action, and the National Organization for Women, and 4 members of Congress. I'm so proud to have their support, and I would love to have yours. They're supporting me because they know that I have the message to beat Zeldin. I have the experience. I bring unique expertise and skills to this office, which will allow me to really make a difference. And I would love to have your support. I'm very grateful to all of you for being on this call. And I want to again thank the North Country Peace Group, my neighbors across the street, and the South Country Peace Group for putting this wonderful event together. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And Bridget, I guess you'll have the last word.
All right. Thank you, Susan. And thank you to South Country Peace Group and the North Country Peace Group for hosting this wonderful forum. We're in a terrible time in our nation and certainly in our communities, and the devastation is just widespread. As a county legislator, I have been working hard around the clock to deliver resources and information to people who are truly suffering. If we don't seize on this opportunity to make the world a better place, we have lost an opportunity, and we have spent lives and businesses and time in vain. But we don't have to do that. I have spent my entire professional career serving the public, and government is complex. And that experience that I bring to bear is experience that will serve you and us in Washington. Every time Donald Trump has hurt New York, has hurt New York One, I have stood up in my professional public official capacity and said, we won't take this, we're fighting back. I will continue to fight back. And that's why not only do I have the support of the people that I've mentioned, that's why I am strong in Brookhaven, because in Brookhaven, I have the support of Presiding Officer Rob Calarco and Patchogue, Al Krupski, I can't remember, Dwayne Gregory, Bill Lindsay. These are public officials who are going to go out and work for me. They may be doing it at the moment while I'm on another Zoom call. So we can do this. We can do it in the long term. We must do it because the stakes could not be higher. Let's take on Lee Zeldin. Let's take on Donald Trump, and let's do it in a way that with a proven team that can deliver results and bring New York One back to us, back to our voices, back to your voices. Join me. Let's beat Lee Zeldin together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point, the North Country Peace Group and the South Country Peace Group want to thank everyone for attending. We had well over 100 people throughout all of this. At one point, we were up into the 170s, and we thank the well over 100 people that stayed with us till the end. Thank you so much to Bridget Fleming, Perry Gershon, and Nancy Goroff for participating. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the planning committee members for putting this together. And we just want to remind all the attendees that you will automatically receive in the mail an application for an absentee ballot for the June 23rd primary. You must then complete the application, checking off temporary illness as indicated by the state rule on that. And then you mail it in order to receive an absentee ballot itself, if you would like to submit an absentee ballot. So again, you'll receive the application in the mail, and then you mail it in to receive the actual absentee ballot. You complete that ballot and you mail that in.